Welcome to the Global Conversations Tour webinar, a live conversation with Wharton Dean Geoff Garrett. Dean Garrett will take questions from the audience following a conversation with our student moderators, Dylan Adelman and Andra Ofosu. Dylan is a sophomore from Minnesota and is studying finance and international studies in the Huntsman program. He is the chair of the Wharton Alumni Relations Council and hopes to pursue a career in U.S. politics. Andra is a second-year MBA from Accra, Ghana. Among her many on-campus involvements, she is a Student Life Fellow and on the boards of Wharton Women in Business and the Wharton Africa Student Association. After Wharton, she plans to work in fundraising for investment funds. Dean Garrett will take questions following the conversation. Please submit your questions using the Ask a Question link, which can be found right above the video player. We will also conduct 2 polls, which we encourage you to complete. The links for each poll are also above the video player. Please join me in welcoming Geoff Garrett. Geoff became Dean and Reliance Professor of Management and Private Enterprise of the Wharton School in 2014. He was previously a member of the Wharton faculty in the 90s. Prior to his return to Penn, he was Dean of the Business Schools at both the University of Sydney and the University of New South Wales in his native Australia. Dean Garrett earned his BA with honors from the Australian National University and his MA and PhD from Duke University, where he was a Fulbright Scholar. A distinguished international political economist, Geoff's innovative vision and deep commitment to the Wharton community has earned him a warm reception from alumni worldwide. We are delighted to welcome him to this conversation.
Welcome to all of our viewers this morning. We're excited to be here with you today, and we look forward to taking all of your questions at the end of this session. We're going to start this off with a poll where you can find the 2 questions for the buttons at the top of the screen. And while we're waiting for you to take that poll, we'll start with some of the first questions. So, Dean Garrett, you recently completed your Global Conversations tour, traveling around the world to 13 different cities in order to meet Wharton alumni. What are some of your big takeaways from that experience? Well,
good morning, Dylan, and good morning, Andra. Thanks so much to you for being here. And for everyone out there in internet land, I can tell you that it's we're on downtown Locust Walk in Philadelphia, where it feels like an early spring morning. It's a bit rainy, and yesterday Groundhog said that we're going to have a short winter. So that's the report from Philadelphia this morning. In terms of the Global Conversations tour, Dylan, you know, I really took away three big things about Wharton alumni. The first one is just the reach of the school, the reach of our alums. I can go literally anywhere in the world and find lots of high quality Wharton alums. So global reach. Second, I've used the word quality. Wharton people are in leadership positions in every sector of most economies, most societies. So not only in the private sector, but in governments and not-for-profits. So reach and quality. And then the third thing, and probably the most important thing for me in the school, is engagement. The level of engagement that our alumni have with the school is just incredible. And it's a cliche of business school life, but for Wharton, it's absolutely true that our alumni base is our greatest resource. So having high-quality alumni all around the world who are engaged with the school is just a tremendous thing. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing I learned from the Global Conversations tour. But let me say in terms of substance, I loved the fact that our dialogues were genuinely 2 ways. So people wanted to hear from me a little bit about the school, but I also wanted to learn from moderators sitting in your chairs, but also all the people in the audience about their parts of the world. So really the first year for me of being Dean was about listening and learning, and the Global Conversations tour was a very central element in that.
Thank you to everyone that took the time to fill in our poll. Now let's take a look at the results. In terms of the professional experience of our alumni that are signed in today, we have 26% involved in entrepreneurship, 28% in innovation, and 46% in data analytics. We also asked whether alumni still think of Wharton as a school of finance, and 30% said yes, 70% said no. These are interesting results, Dean, and I'd love for you to comment on them at some point.
Well, they're very interesting and in a lot of ways heartening. You know, for those of you who are not in the US and looking at the US, you know we're in presidential election season, and one of the Republican candidates happens to be a Wharton alum, and he likes talking about the Wharton School of Finance. And I always smile when I hear him say that, because when I go into my office, I know that's never been the name of the school. The official name of the school when it was founded in 1881 was the Wharton School of Finance and Commerce. Today we just call it the Wharton School, which really means, in parentheses, of everything. It's much more like a Wharton University than it is a business school. So the fact that only 30% of people who are viewing today thought of Wharton as the finance school is interesting, heartening, but I think for me it requires a little nuance, particularly when we go to the first question, which had analytics. A lot of the people who are viewed themselves as being in an analytics game. You know, Wharton is the finance school, and being the global leader in finance is a fantastic thing. But I really think the thing that makes Wharton Finance great makes the whole school great, and that's this rigorous focus on data and analysis and data-driven decision-making. And I think in a world of big data where, you know, information is coming at us 100 miles an hour, it's a blizzard, you can't really see the horizon, the focus on analytics is not only the core of the school, it's a focus that will allow everyone associated with Wharton to be better leaders out there in the world, to make more productive change. Why? Because at the end of the day, you know, there's a lot to leadership, but making better decisions is a key element of that, and I think Wharton is very well placed to help all of you do that.
Let me ask a follow-up question. During your tour, were there any things that you heard or saw that confirmed or changed your perception of our alumni?
Well, I couldn't have imagined the three things that I highlighted in response to the first question: the sheer global reach, the quality, and the level of engagement that our alums have with the school. But actually, the biggest thing for me was a humbling personal one, and it gave me just a much sharper focus on the responsibilities I have being dean of the school, which was my name. So, you know, for most of my life, I'm an informal Australian. So when I introduce myself to somebody, I say, "Hi, I'm Geoff Garrett. I'm Dean of the Wharton School. Please call me Geoff." And then the first thing somebody says is Dean Garrett. And in fact, it creates problems when I check in to hotels or in buildings because they're looking for Dean Garrett, and on my driver's license they see Geoffrey Garrett. So that was interesting. But actually, outside Global Conversations Tour, just to show you how big the Wharton world is, we did an event in Kuwait City, on a Sunday afternoon, and there were about 250 people listening to me have a conversation with a really impressive Kuwaiti. The person who introduced me that day called me Geoffrey Wharton, which really showed me that I have no identity. And in fact, you know, why don't we just change my name to Dean Wharton? So that's humbling at a personal level. But what it tells me is the respect for the institution that people have all over the world is embedded in the fact that people want to call me Dean. And that was, as I said, for somebody who's felt, you know, I stand or fall on myself for much of my life, the responsibility and the power and everything else that comes with being a Dean of Wharton, it was truly eye-opening to me.
So, Dean, you mentioned how a lot of...
You can call me Geoff, but that's okay.
So, Geoff, you mentioned how Wharton does have this very global brand name, and how in all of these governments and economies worldwide, you can always find someone from the Wharton School who's a leader there. But beyond that sort of prestige and status behind Wharton, what really makes the school unique?
Yeah, uniqueness, you know, you want to be careful about using a word like unique, because that means there's no one else like it. And, you know, we live in an elite world of business schools where there are a few places competing, and they're all great institutions. But if I think about what genuinely stands out about Wharton, and maybe uniquely so, I'd say three things. First is the vertical scale of the school. When most people think business schools, they think the full-time MBA program, and it's great that we have one of the top full-time MBAs in the world. But as you know, we have the best undergraduate business program in the United States, and I think arguably in the world too, and it's pretty big. 1/4 of Penn undergraduates are in the Wharton School. That's not true for any of our competitors. We also have the largest PhD program of any business school in the world, and it's really heartening to me that in all of the rankings, you know, some of the rankings bounce around, but one that doesn't change is that Wharton is always the #1 ranked research business school. And so a research-led focus is another distinctive element of Wharton. So So that the vertical reach of the school, I think, is unparalleled. Second thing I'd say is just to emphasize that research-led part. We really are a research-led business school, and it means that we import a lot of talent and perspectives from other parts of the university. We've got lots of lawyers, lots of psychologists, economists, health policy experts in the school because we're a research magnet. And then the third element actually is, for me, embodied just when I walked in this morning. You know, if you think about business schools, they tend to be more modern parts of universities, or they're standalone institutions, which means they're not in the core of campus. If you look at Wharton, our two main buildings, Steinberg-Dietrich, where we are, and Huntsman, straddle Locust Walk, which is the dead center of the Penn campus. So Wharton is central to Penn geographically. It's central in terms of students because we do everything, including undergraduate. And it's central historically. Wharton has grown up with the university. So centrality is close to unique. Research-led, we're certainly known for that. And the fact that we do everything from undergraduate to PhD and beyond is also very distinctive of the school.
Before I move on to the next question, I'd like to remind our audience that we're taking questions for the Dean. I would love to answer them, and so do send them along. Dean, what do you perceive as the biggest challenges and opportunities for Wharton in the next few years? Yeah,
when we teach leadership and management classes, of course, we always want to do SWOT analysis. What are your strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and challenges? The way I think about it actually is not a sort of defensive, gee, what keeps you up at night? When people ask me the question, what keeps you up at night? I tend to say what keeps me up at night is being excited about what's ahead. Now, I don't think you can be naive about opportunities. So the way I'd reframe your question, at least the way I think about it, is challenging opportunities. Wharton is on an incredible trajectory. We've got a fantastic history. We're a global leader. So I'd better make sure I don't screw that up. But if you look at new things, I'm struck by the fact that the two things that are changing the world are also changing the world of higher education and the world of business schools. And those are technology, online, what we're doing now, and globalization. So if I was to think about the things that would look genuinely distinctive maybe to people who were here 10 years ago, 20 years ago, are those two. We're a leader and an experimenter and an innovator in online education, which I think is very important in lots of ways. And second, we're really pushing a global footprint. So on online, for example, many people might know, some people might not know, that on the MOOC platform Coursera, Wharton's by far the biggest player of any individual school in the world. We've got, in terms of unique eyeballs who've looked at our MOOC content, in the past 3 years, we're getting close to 3 million people who've sampled some Wharton education. That's incredible. There's a lot more to say about that, but those numbers hit you between the eyes. And then on the globalization side, obviously we've already got a global student body. You're a fantastic representative of that. We've got a global faculty. I'm Australian, and like so many of my faculty colleagues, I wasn't born in this country, even though I'm an American citizen. But we need to do global experiences for everybody. And we have global modular classes, which I think have been a great innovation. We've got a global immersion program. We've got some things, but Wharton's also made some big bets. So the fact that we opened the Penn Wharton China Center in Beijing, I think, was a very important thing, and that's taken actually a significant amount of my time in the last 12 or 18 months. And something that I didn't really know as well as I should have is that Wharton actually, over the past 30 years, has helped create 3 business schools outside America. So one in Thailand, one in Singapore, and one in India. And I think that process will continue as well. So technology, I think more opportunity than challenge. Same on globalization, but that's against a backdrop where the core of what the school is, this is not. One of the things I love about Wharton is it's not a rest on your laurels kind of place. So the fact that we've got great history, great heritage and great rankings, no one's just sitting back and saying, boy, isn't that fantastic? We want constantly to improve everything we're doing, but the funnel's getting a bit wider, the lens is getting broader because of globalization and technology.
And speaking about the MOOCs, a common concern that you'll hear is whether or not it'll cannibalize the experience of those of us that are on campus. Is that something that you've thought about?
It's the thing that I think about most. And actually not cannibalize in a business model sense, but what does it do for the brand? Is being a big player in online consistent with what Wharton stands for? And I'm firmly of the view that the answer to that question is yes, but it does require a little nuance. So the first line of nuance is really a line in the sand that we've drawn, which is that all the stuff we're doing in online is not for credit towards our degree. Never will be, I think. Now, an interesting development might be that people will start using Wharton online content, probably facilitated towards their degrees or in their executive training programs. But that's not what we're about. We've drawn this very firm line, not for credit towards our degree, on-campus experience. The second thing that is really important about MOOC is that our faculty are becoming much more comfortable with different ways of teaching. So now we've got about 40 of our tenure track and tenured professors who've got real experience doing online classes. In the jargon of educational change, people talk about flipping the classroom, which means, in essence, putting lecture-like material online so that you prepare to come to class to do the very high value added stuff, the interactive, collaborative, problem-solving approach that I think everyone needs for the real world as well as the university world. So what does that mean? I think it means that there'll be a big feedback loop, that what we learn about education online will actually improve and add more value to our on-campus education. And I think what you'll see in the broader world of higher education is a bifurcation. For a lot of people, credential and convenience plus skill will be enough, and that's where online degrees, frankly, will be very powerful, particularly at the graduate level. But for a small chunk of people, the value of an elite on-campus experience with incredible peers, incredible professors, and lots of interaction, I think that value will keep going up. So I don't think online and on campus is inconsistent. I actually think we can be an online leader, and by being an online leader, over time it's going to improve what we do on campus, and I think that's a great combination.
So with all this talk of MOOCs and shifting to a more global focus, for example, with the Penn Wharton China Center, I guess the question that I want to ask is how you think Wharton can maintain its focus as an educational institution for finance while simultaneously having a more analytic focus in that education? Yeah,
so again, that's a great question and a really big thing. And this is an area where I think there's a sort of brain disconnect. We like thinking about concepts analytically as being distinctive. But in the real world, most things tend to have overlaps. And I actually think that it's the overlaps that strengthen the institution. So let me see if I can do some math with my hands. Right, I think about Wharton really as a triangle, but it's a triangle of 3 intersecting circles. So one big circle, one everyone knows about, is Wharton Finance. And that's not a backward-looking thing, it's a forward-looking thing. The world of alternative investments is big. Wharton's a big player. We should own that. But think about entrepreneurship, right? Everyone now knows about the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. For people of your generation, they're the heroes. A lot of people would think that entrepreneurship and finance don't go together. But if you look at the world of alternative investments, most of the people who created hedge funds and private equity firms started off in big banks. And at some point they said, I've got an idea and I'm going to go out on my own. What does that make them? It makes them entrepreneurs. So I don't think it's either or entrepreneurship and finance. I think there's a big connect there. And then the same is true for analytics. That's where I started. You take a Wharton finance class, of course you've got to be rigorous and analytical about it. But that's also true of everything else we've got at the Wharton School. I spoke about breadth a little while ago. Wharton's got 20 world-class statisticians sitting in the business school. There is no other business school like that. You know, all universities have statistics departments, but everywhere else, statistics is sitting in the sciences. At Penn, statistics is in Wharton. So if we want to be an analytics school, if we want to do, you know, make a big data play as we do, we're better positioned than anyone else. And I know you're interested, Andra, in sort of soft skills, but I think what Wharton would say about soft skills is you can be pretty analytical about that as well. You don't have to have a lot of squiggles and numbers to be analytical. And so I think that the breadth of the Wharton analytical focus is something that, you know, is, first of all, it's striking, but second, I think it's empowering to everyone.
So on that topic of the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and entrepreneurship, how do you see Wharton sort of promoting that view in the 21st century?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one too that we have to think about. You know, if it's not true of Mark Zuckerberg, but think about Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, Bill Gates. The view really is that that the innovations come out of engineering schools. And I think we have to ask a very rigorous question about, well, what's our place in that world? And I don't think it's, again, I don't think it's either or, I think it's and. People who have great ideas using digital technology, boy, that's really important. But there's a big difference between having a great idea and turning it into an institution that will change the world. And I think that turning great ideas into great businesses or great institutions really is the sweet spot for the Wharton School. And actually, if you look at Silicon Valley today, I think you see a lot of evidence for that. You know, Google Alphabet released their results a couple of days ago, and they, you know, spectacular success. It's great for me that the CEO, Sundar Pichai, and the CFO, Ruth Porat, are both Wharton MBAs. Now, it transpires that they both also have Stanford degrees. But I don't think that's either or. I think it's and. You know, the Wharton business skills clearly added to their portfolio. Or take a Wharton undergraduate alum, Geoff Weiner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn. You know, Geoff's an amazing guy. He sits next to Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. One of the smartest things that Reid Hoffman did was to put Geoff in the CEO seat, because Geoff's a kind of guy who can grow that business spectacularly well. So if I had to summarize all of that, if I had a sort of one-sentence tagline, it would be that Wharton's a great place to turn a great idea into a great business.
I mean, expanding on that further, what are some of the things that are happening on campus, or some of the things you intend to do to promote entrepreneurship and innovation? Yeah,
also something obviously that we're thinking a lot about. You know, over the summer, we created a new position, a Vice Dean for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and put Carl Ulrich in that position. I know many people in our viewing audience probably had Carl as a professor. He's an incredible guy and a successful serial entrepreneur himself. So putting Carl in the seat was very important, and I don't think any other business school today has a position like that. But Carl has really three big points that he wants to focus on. One is sort of the incubation of ideas on campus, creating a hub for entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs among our student body, not only at Wharton but the rest of Penn. And an important point there is to say it's not really about the success of what you do when you're a student, it's the mindset change, going through the process, thinking about innovation, thinking about entrepreneurship in a rigorous way. Even if the thing that you invent on campus doesn't go anywhere, the mindset that you've got can take you a long way further in your career. So we think that's important. Second, we've got an incredible resource at the Wharton School, which is our downtown San Francisco campus right under the Bay Bridge. And you know, when we created that campus, the view was that we needed to have a rigorous business model for it, and the business model was executive MBA. But I think Carl and I both see Wharton San Francisco not as a Wemba bubble that just teaches executive MBA, but really a way for us to integrate into the Bay Area at all levels. So we now have MBAs doing a semester in San Francisco. We're looking very hard at expanding that program to undergraduates. We already have a week for undergraduates in San Francisco. It's an incredible opportunity. I'm getting on a plane to go there tomorrow to meet with some of our alums to talk about this. So San Francisco is a second element. And the third one is a sort of lifelong learning approach. One thing we see in career choices for our students is that a lot of people, when they leave here, go into quote-unquote conventional careers at a very elite level, obviously, in consulting firms and financial institutions. But what happens 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later is a lot of people want to strike out on their own. And we want to be there for you, not only when you're on campus and not only when you leave campus, but for the rest of your lives. So lifelong learning could be thought of as a kind of passive thing. You know, you come back to Wharton and refresh your skills. But we want it to be much more active. We want to be there to help you throughout your careers with all the changes that will probably, you know, that you will drive in your lives. Because as we all know now, the sort of old cliche of you leave, you go into a firm and you stay there for the next 40 years, that doesn't hold for, literally doesn't hold for anybody.
So to shift the focus a little bit, throughout your Global Conversations tour, you focused a lot on the growing role of the private sector. So could you expand just a bit more on those views?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a, you know, as a political scientist, somebody who's been interested in the interaction between politics and the economy for a long time, I was struck by the post-2008 negativity towards the private sector. You know, much of which made a lot of sense. But one consequence of the financial crisis, ironic consequence maybe, is that I think the role of the private sector is going to be bigger going forward. Why? Because social needs everywhere we see are rising, and the ability of government to meet them is constrained. In the West, it's constrained by the fact that public debt burdens are very high, so responsible government should be deleveraging, not investing in new stuff. And in emerging markets, taxation, increasing taxes is a real challenge, because if you increase the tax rate, you drive people into the informal economy and the tax take goes down. So that creates an environment where good government is going to be about working with the private sector to create the right incentives and to encourage as well as to regulate private sector involvement in things that we might have thought of as being public. And you know, in the emerging markets, the biggest example of that is infrastructure. I think infrastructure, probably with the single exception of China, is the most important challenge for most emerging markets. And there's just no way that the government, quote unquote, the government can provide the infrastructure required to unleash the full potential of emerging markets. So a broader notion of public-private partnership, I think, is going to be literally essential to the future of emerging markets. And the good news is that, I think, is that the private sector, there's lots of evidence that the private sector really is stepping in there in ways that is positive. So it might be a glib rendering, but my one sentence, my tagline on that would be the rising public role of the private sector.
Dean, we've talked a little bit about sort of how you see Wharton being changed and transformed. How do you see the school in 5 years, 10 years? What are some of the big themes in terms of your crystal ball?
There's the old line, for those of you who've done a lot of statistics and econometrics, you know the line. The line is, prediction is tough, particularly about the future, because we tend to like predicting backwards in econometrics. So it's hard, you know, it's hard to say. You know, I think my daughter, I have a cynical 18-year-old daughter who says that everyone always, her conjecture is that everyone always thinks they're living in the period of most rapid change. Right? Oh boy, in the old days everything was more stable, but for us the world's changing. I think it might actually, this might be a case where that's true, that the pace of change is unprecedented. So thinking about the future is hard, but some simple predictions that I would make. First, all the things that everyone associates with Wharton today will still be there in 5 and 10 years. In fact, they'll be there in 20 years, in 50 years. Second, I think the online revolution in higher education will continue, and that technology will become more interwoven with everything we do at the school. And third, global isn't going away. You know, just look at the demographics, right? I mean, the United States is a very large country, 300 million people, projected to grow to 350 or so by the middle of this century. India is going to have 1.7 million people by 2050, and they're going to be young, and they're going to be aspiring to better lives, and education is going to be a key part of that. I don't, you know, we tend to think that globalization was a kind of 1990s phenomenon, but I think we're going to see that decentering of the world, the decentering of the center of gravity, shift in the center of gravity towards Asia is just going to continue, and certainly Wharton is going to have to Wharton is going to be affected by that. We want to be proactive and help shape the directory of change going forward.
So as we look down that longer time frame of 5 years or a decade or 2 decades from now, a lot of people look at Wharton San Francisco as being another big factor here. So as time moves on, what opportunities do you see there, both for students and alumni?
Yeah, the Wharton San Francisco, we agree, is an incredible asset for the school, and it's one that we should leverage more. I think having all of our educational programs with a real footprint in San Francisco is something we should focus hard on. It's actually much harder at the undergraduate level than MBA, because your parents probably want to make sure that we look after you very well when you're in San Francisco, whereas for MBAs we can say, listen, go and find somewhere to live, just show up in class. So the challenges, the sort of campus-like nature of San Francisco will have to increase if we want to accommodate undergraduates there. So having all of our students with a real taste of whatever's in the water in Silicon Valley is very important. But I don't think that's all. It's at least 2 other things are important. One is it should become a locus for research for us in everything about technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And the other is that this 2-way integration with the Bay Area is an incredible opportunity for us, because we have fantastic Wharton people already incredibly well positioned in Silicon Valley, in tech companies and in finance and in real estate. And we should just leverage that. We're only an hour and a little bit on the train away from New York. I spend a lot of time in New York. Lots of people here do. We can't do exactly the same thing in the Bay Area, but being integrated into the region the way we are here, I think is that's a pretty bold thing to try to aspire to, but I think it is what we should hope to achieve.
One of the things alumni get to take advantage of when they leave Wharton is lifelong learning. We've talked a little bit about online learning and how that's sort of impacting on-campus experience. How do you sort of see integrating alumni engagement and the whole concept of MOOCs and online learning?
Yeah, I think you've focused on something, Andra, which has incredibly high potential. So if you think about this pure MOOC world, and anyone who's taken a MOOC will know this, it's a kind of standalone experience. You have this great convenience. You can do it on your own time, on your phone, in your bed, whenever you want to. But it isn't isolating, it's splendid isolation. So if I think about how one adds more value to a MOOC, it's by creating a learning community around the MOOC, 20 people, 30 people, 50 people, who don't have to be in the same city, by the way. The technology allows us to do it remotely. And then to have some kind of facilitation where you have direct interaction with the instructor, more like a seminar or a tutorial. So one way that we're actively thinking about, not redoing the MOOC content, but reusing our MOOC content, is we have these fantastic building blocks. We have some of the best Wharton professors now have laid down core material in MOOCs. Why don't we create an alumni-based learning community around that and allow the alumni not only to interact with each other, to discuss with each other what they're learning in the MOOC context, but also to interact with the professor. That's very high value, and it takes advantage of the technology. It doesn't mean that everyone will have to do what they'd have to do today, which is to come back to campus to get that experience. So really, MOOC to face-to-face, we tend to think about it as a dichotomy, but in fact it's a continuum, and there are lots of places along the continuum that we should focus on and exploit.
Awesome. So before we ask the final question, just want to remind the audience to send in their own questions so that we can ask those towards the end of the period. So the final question sort of builds on some themes that you've been discussing through the hour. The big roles
and I hope I get to ask you guys some questions too.
Of course, just after this. This is just after we run out of our own. But our one big question, it's kind of on a larger scale, with the differing roles and growing roles of both technology and globalization in education, where do you see the future of business education, both in the United States and more globally?
Boy, that's a big question too. And And the reason it's a big question is that the world of business education is so large. So, you know, I can give you the US numbers. Global ones are a bit harder. Of all of the master's degrees issued in the US today, about a quarter are in business schools. That's also true at the undergraduate level. About a quarter of US undergraduates either do a business degree or a business majors. So business education is large. Outside the US, where there's no liberal arts tradition, I would expect the numbers to be even bigger. You know, in my native Australia, the business school numbers are like 30 and 40% of the student body. So the business of business education is really big business. But it is going to be changing. It's changing you foreshadowed in two ways. One is that the marketplace for business education is truly global. You know, you look at the Wharton School today, and about a third of our MBAs, like you, Andra, came to the US from outside the country. Interestingly, at the undergraduate level, that number's about 25%. I think a lot of people would be surprised by that. And of course, if you included second-generation migrants, the non-ethnically American number at Wharton would go much higher. But I don't think, because our on-campus education is so finite, I don't think places like Wharton will just expand, you know, massively in Philadelphia. We're space constrained, we're supply constrained across the board. We need high-quality faculty. What will happen with business education, as I said, is that the marketplace will diverge. We'll have a smaller number of players focusing on a very enriching on-campus experience where the price will be high, but I think the value will be higher. And then we'll have a mass market of experimentation and different models, which will be much more convenience-based, convenience plus credential-based out there in the world. You know, Wharton's in a very privileged position being a global leader, but we also have to recognize that what we can provide on campus is just a finite resource. So that's why I do think sort of a pie in the sky, have your cake and eat it too approach to online is the right one. We can use online to double down on the value of what we provide on campus, but it'll also help us get access to people all around the world who could really never dream of coming to Wharton and we wouldn't know about without online. So business schools are big, business schools are going to expand, and the world is going to be an innovative one. Fortunately for Wharton, you know, we're right at the top of that mountain. But I think that being at the top of the mountain actually gives us both an opportunity and a bit of a responsibility to keep innovating, because we can define what the future is going to look like.
We spent the last half hour or so asking you questions. It's your turn to ask us some.
Finally, we get a chance. Yeah. So you know, I always want to. I love interacting with students. Thanks for being such good moderators. But now I have to put you in the hot seat. And when I talk with students, there are really two things I want to know about from your perspective. You know, in a world of choice where you're very talented people, why Wharton? What was the Wharton difference? And then the second question is really about what's it like to be here, and what are the most memorable experiences for you? So it's a why Wharton question and a what's most memorable. I don't know who wants to go first. Since you invited, why don't you go first?
I'm happy to. Why Wharton? I was drawn to the rigor of the program, the academic program especially.
So that didn't turn you off? That was a plus?
It was a plus. I wanted to get value for money. I wanted to learn. And so, you know, for instance, the fact that the classroom experience is a combination of lectures, cases, and discussions amongst my classmates, that you had all of these channels and avenues to continuously learn and be challenged. And sort of you'd mentioned Wharton's data-driven approach, the fact that I was going to be learning a systematic approach to decision-making. All of the classes, nearly all of the classes that I've taken have been about making me a better leader in terms of making sound decisions. So that was a real draw. The other big factor for me was the combination, the flexibility that the combination of the fixed core and the flex core structure gives. Coming into Wharton, I'd also decided that I was going to make the step of starting a family at the same time as doing my MBA, and that would not have been possible without the structure that, you know, the flexible core structure allowed me to structure a class schedule that fit around the responsibilities that I had.
On your family, I know there are a lot of young families in the MBA program, but in our executive MBA. it's even more pronounced. And at the Wemba San Francisco graduation last May, which was held in this beautiful building in San Francisco, in the City Hall building in San Francisco, where they have a fantastic cascading staircase, great for photo ops. The best photo op was all the student parents holding all the kids who'd been born during their time at Wharton. It was just not a dry eye in the house when that photograph was taken.
So I have a 1-year-old and I have another one on the way 3 weeks after graduation. So I'll have...
Hey, timing is everything. Right?
I'll be waddling across the stage to collect my diploma from you.
I can't wait to hand it to you.
Yeah, so my draw to Wharton was a bit more because of my background and my interests. So I was very interested in Wharton as a very international school, one that didn't just look at business as a singular thing, but recognizing business in a more international and globalized context.
And you come from the middle of the country, right?
Exactly.
So did you have a passport? Do you have a passport? How are you thinking about all that international stuff?
I do indeed have a passport.
There are cliches out there in the world about Americans. Yeah, about Minnesota, about the Midwest, and people don't have passports. So you'll have to tell us your story.
Yeah, so while I am from a flyover state, I nonetheless do recognize the importance of having a very global education. So what really drew me to coming to Wharton was actually the dual degree program that I'm a part of, the Huntsman program, which is exactly. It's a dual degree program between Wharton and the College of Arts and Science. So I get to pursue simultaneous interests in finance and economics, but also get to study international studies. Specifically for me, I focus on Spanish and Latin American and Latino culture.
So how are you feeling about Latin American economy today?
So it's not doing as good as one might hope, I would suppose. A lot of that's obviously the result of falling oil prices and corruption scandals in various places. But on the bright side, Argentina's doing better than ever. Apologize to all of the fans of the Kirchners out there. However, nonetheless, I'm optimistic about the region. So.
And you're going to get to go to Brazil during the Olympics, or not?
I don't know if I'll have
excuses for doing that.
I don't think I have any excuses for doing that at the moment, unless you'd like to fund that trip, of course.
Well, we have to. We do have. I think Mauro Guillen, who runs the Lauder program, the analog of Huntsman at the MBA level. I think Mauro takes a global modular class to Rio, probably not during the Olympics. It'd be a little hard to get around and to find a hotel room. But I think you're right that what's happened in Latin America doesn't have nearly as much to do with internal things as with the China slowdown and all the impact that's had not only on oil but other commodities. But it is an important part of the world. And I've spoken with Leonard Lauder, whose idea the Lauder program was 35 years ago, and you're exactly the model of the kind of person that he wanted to change. That America, because it's a big place, because it's been so successful, and because foreigners have come here for so long, it's allowed the US to be quite parochial, because you don't have to go to the world comes to you if you're American. But I think in the 21st century, it's not going to be like that at all. So my hat is off to you for taking the big, bold leap from Minneapolis to Buenos Aires.
I think you're definitely right, though, in terms of education needing to have that more international focus in the 21st century. As you mentioned, it's becoming a bit more parochial since the end of the Cold War, really. But I think now more than ever, it's important to have that international perspective and really recognize what's going on in the world.
And for me, and I'm sure this is true for you too, coming to the United States literally changed my life, right? And created opportunities for me, not only that I didn't envisage, but I literally didn't know about, right? It opened up the world to me, a world of opportunities that I just literally could never have conceived in Australia. So my debt of gratitude and my awe for what the US has done as a magnet for talented people from around the world is incredible. But it has meant that if the world comes to you, you don't need to go to the world. So if we can balance that out a bit in the 21st century, I think that's exactly the right place to be.
Now we'll take some questions from alumni. The first question that's come through, Dean, is what efforts and requirements are you currently putting in place to ensure that the Wharton student body are learning an ethical approach to business?
Yeah, obviously after, a very good question and a question clearly that was prompted by 2008 and the financial crisis. I think if I think about it at Wharton, about it quite broadly. I think our whole leadership program, in fact, is about creating ethical leaders, responsible leaders, people who lead with integrity. And what Mike Useem and his colleagues have done in the leadership program over really 20 years is incredibly impressive. And I was so pleased last week that Anne McNulty gave us a new gift to endow that program. Fantastic. Something to be celebrated by us all. But you know, we have a legal studies department that also focuses on business ethics, and obviously there are a lot of great classes there, both at the undergraduate and the MBA level. You know, I think the way to do ethics isn't necessarily to have, oh, you take that, you know, you check the ethics box by taking this class. It's to imbue it throughout the school, and certainly focusing on personal integrity is just critically important. It's critically important to all leaders. I think a diversity focus fits naturally in with that as well. Leading diverse communities is going to be essential to us all. So don't think about ethics narrowly, think about it broadly, and focus on the leadership move strikes me as being the best way to ensure this. And of course, for everyone at the school, it's also a case of holding the mirror up and making sure that we all uphold the highest standards for ourselves in everything we do. So nothing could be more important, but I don't think a sort of simple check the box approach is the way to deal with ethical challenges. It's to take a very holistic view.
So a bit earlier we talked about lifelong learning and how Wharton has a more global footprint in trying to engage its alumni, for example, with your recent Global Conversations tour. So what steps are you taking in order to ensure that alumni are still getting help with developing their professional skills throughout their career? Yeah,
it's one we're thinking a lot about. So let me start at the highest level. You know, I'm getting on a plane in a couple of days. I have to go to the West Coast, then I'm going to the Middle East for a couple of days. You know, for me, travel's a necessary evil in the job. I just don't think it's appropriate. You can't do global just by reading about it in a book. You have to be there, you have to interact with people. So it's very important for me symbolically to be in the world for the school, but at a personal level, I also know that's the only way I can learn about the world. Being somewhere and talking with people who are living that life and trying to live the life yourself. So that's important for the school going out. In terms of our value proposition for alumni, you know, Wharton's a very decentralized place, which is a wonderful thing because it empowers people at the local level. It creates a coordination challenge. For alums, we have alumni clubs, which are independent organizations all over the world. We have a lot in the US, but we have a lot outside the US as well. What we're trying to do is to coordinate better both between Philadelphia and the alumni clubs, but also one club to the next. There are a lot of resources sitting in our alumni base that don't require a Wharton professor to be there. I'll give you an example from last December in Beijing. We put on an event for entrepreneurs in China. We had 80 or 90 people came to the Penn Wharton China Center for an evening of networking and learning. There wasn't a Wharton professor there. The people who were on the stage were successful Wharton Chinese entrepreneurs. And the power base that our alumni represent is just incredible. It's expertise, it's experience, it's network. So figuring out how to harness that power without stifling the ownership at the local level, you know, that's a management challenge, but I think the upside is very high.
We have another question that's just come in. You'd mentioned Wharton's footprint in China and even in India. Specifically in regards to India, what are the ways in which you're looking to expand your footprint?
Yeah, you know, I think about India a lot for the obvious reasons, the scale, the potential of India. So, you know, to my mind, if I think about India over the medium term, I would say Wharton has to have a bigger presence in India. Whether that means a physical facility is another question, but more involvement, more engagement with India we've got to do. You know, when India becomes a country of 1.7 billion people, many of whom are moving into the middle class in an environment of rapid change, incredible innovation, that's a place we want to be. But one lesson I've certainly learned from the Penn Wharton China Center is just how much thinking in advance you need to do to make sure you can actually execute. So from beginning conception to opening, the Penn Wharton China Center timeline's probably 5 years. There was so much planning in that, so much fundraising required in it. The lesson I really learned is a due diligence lesson. You don't want to say in a sort of thought bubble, gee, it'd be nice to have a comparable center in India. What you say quietly in your head is, boy, it'd be nice if we could replicate this over time in India, but we don't want to announce it on day one. What we want to do is start putting some building blocks in place. And it may take 5 years, it might take 10 years, but as long as we think about it in that way and we have really a rigorous business hat on when we think about global expansion, I think that's got to be the right balance. Of course we need to be more global, but let's not jump into things, let's think our way through them.
So the Wharton Initiative for Environmental Leadership is often seen as a small but remarkable force for good at the Wharton School. So with sustainability movements like that at the school, how do you promote that idea of sustainability in business practices among Wharton students, alumni, and professional leaders?
Yeah, sustainability is obviously a very important issue, and again, I think sustainability is a perfect example of the rising public or social role of the private sector. You know, if you look back at the history of environmental agreements, right, it's just become harder and harder and harder to make a big global deal. And, you know, in the United States, as you know, President Obama can't get things through Congress, so he does executive action, and gee, is that going to work? The political path to environmental sustainability and business sustainability looks a fraught path. The private sector path makes a lot more sense to me. Think about China. One reason that China's become a leader in renewable energy, or certainly non-carbon energy, you know, think about batteries, solar, wind, is because it's a great export opportunity for them. They can create the wind turbines that the Germans are putting in the ground in Germany. So that's a business move. Think in the United States, you know, what's an obvious thing for all businesses? Energy efficiency, right? Often a problem in climate change negotiations is, I say to you, one country to another, I'll reduce my emissions only if you do, right? It becomes a prisoner's dilemma in the game theory sense. Energy efficiency isn't like that at all. It's in my interest to be more energy efficient because I want to reduce my energy bills. The problem with energy efficiency tends to be time horizon. It's costly for me to make the changes today. So that's where government can help smooth, I think, that path so everyone becomes more energy efficient. So that's a combination about the world. I think sustainability is a really important challenge, but I think it's a challenge that the private sector is going to be increasingly involved in. You know, we used to think it was government telling the private sector what to do. I think that world's going to change. For Wharton, that means that sustainability actually doesn't only sit in the leadership initiative that you're mentioning that Eric Orts runs. It's much broader than that, right? It sits in our social impact world. It sits in entrepreneurship. It's a broader thing for the schools. So again, I don't think the way to do sustainability is to say, oh, we've got a sustainability initiative, let's check that box. It's to think about it much more broadly and to have it as an integral part of lots of stuff in the school.
We'll be taking 3 more questions, Dean. We've talked a lot about the online sort of transformation that's happening at Wharton. Do you intend to allow alumni to get involved in strategic projects on campus via, for instance, an online collaboration too, sometime in the future?
Very good question. So if I think about, let me go at the broadest level, which is really alumni involvement in strategic planning, the strategic direction of the school. Maybe ultimately we can use online to engage lots of alums in that process, but I can tell you what I have done in the very short term is to become very actively involved with all of the advisory boards associated with the school. So not only do we have ones for the different degree programs, undergraduate, MBA, executive education, and an overseer body for the whole school. But we have regional boards, Regional Asia Board, a European MENA board, and a Latin American board. I become very involved in the boards because I think that they're an incredible asset for us. The amount of talent in the room is so high, it's in our interest to leverage the talent, but the only way to do that is for me to be upfront with all of our stakeholders about the opportunities and challenges facing the school. So, my instinct is to be a very open, informal guy anyway. It's my Australian roots. But I've tried to do that with all of our boards, and I think the board members have enjoyed it because they're more engaged in the school, and I know we've benefited from it because we're getting better feedback from them. So if we can use technology to broaden that out to the wider alumni community, I think that'd be a fantastic development.
So our next question is in regards to financial technology, fintech.
Yeah.
And I know that one famous example of a fintech startup from Penn is Venmo, which is a person-to-person payments transfer system. But the question from the alumni is in regards to, beyond just that, what role does Wharton plan to take in the fintech revolution?
Well, fintech is just a perfect example for Wharton, right? Because it's entrepreneurial, it's finance-based, and it's got a lot of analytics in it. So no surprise that we have incredible enthusiasm among current students. There's a fintech club on campus that's relatively new, but is growing vertically. And we have fantastic alums, as you said, in this area. It made me smile because it's a perfect embodiment of my triangle, because it's the intersection of all three. So I would just say that it's bound to boom here.
We'll be taking our final question. In terms of the San Francisco campus,
well, we've got so many.
We were trying to see which one to sort of leave with a big bang. In terms of the San Francisco campus, how do you see that growing Wharton's campus presence in the Silicon Valley in general?
Well, we've already talked about it a bit, but let me just add one thing that I haven't mentioned that will be of interest to our alumni, not only in the Bay Area, but people all around the world. We want to use our facility as something much closer to a co-working space where people who are entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs can gather, can network, can maybe spend a bit of time running their businesses or incubating their businesses. So making Wharton San Francisco more than a classroom, a meeting place and an empowering place for entrepreneurs is something that we're focused very centrally on right now. In fact, I'll be on campus in 36 hours talking with the staff about how we might execute that. So the San Francisco opportunity for us is an incredible one. Those of you who know the Bay Area, there's Stanford down here, there's Berkeley over here. Wharton really is the biggest player in downtown San Francisco, and it's a great asset for us, and I think we will just do more and more with it over time.
Thank you for taking the time to answer all of these questions. We'll wrap up now.
Well, thank you both for being such wonderful partners with me in this enterprise, and thanks to everyone who is spending different parts of your day with us. It's been an incredible pleasure for me, and on behalf of the Wharton School, I want to thank you not only for being with us today, but for all you do for the school. And just remember that your success is our success, so go for it.
Thank you to Dean Garrett, Andra, and Dylan for today's session, and to our audience for joining us. Please be sure to complete the feedback survey using the link above the video player. This conversation will be recorded and available online in the next week. I hope you can join us for our next webinar on February 18th with Professor Nikolai Sigelkow.